As a doctor, navigating the unpredictable currents of an unscheduled work life was my norm. Whether leaving or returning at odd hours, I often found myself alone at home while the rest of my family went about their regular school and job routines. On what seemed to be just another routine day, my family excitedly headed to our relative's house for dinner. However, the unpredictable nature of my profession intervened, and a sudden emergency called me to the hospital at the last moment. Assuring my family I would try to join them later, I swiftly got into my car and sped off to attend to the urgent matter at the hospital. The patient's critical condition from a severe accident required a lengthy operation stretching beyond 4 hours. As I wrapped up the intense treatment, I realized that the dinner with my family had likely concluded and I was running behind schedule. Considering that it was no use rushing there, I took some rest at the hospital for about half an hour, grabbed a meal from the canteen, ensuring I wouldn't go hungry, and then set out for home. The clock had already struck midnight, and my family was also on their way back home. Considering the day's demanding workload, including an unplanned overtime shift at the hospital, I made a spontaneous decision to take a much-needed day off to rest. Upon returning to my house, an unusual hush blanketed the street, an eerie quiet that seemed out of sync with the usual hustle and bustle of the time. Yet, as I approached, my eyes caught sight of a van parked a short distance away, its headlights casting a dim glow on the otherwise silent street. The scene struck me as odd. Someone sitting inside a van on a chilly night seemed out of place. In order to alert the gatekeeper of my arrival, I honked the horn, expecting the familiar sound of the gate swinging open. Strangely, though, the gate remained closed, and there was no sign of anyone approaching to unlock it. This was especially perplexing, as our gatekeeper had never been so ignorant, especially when the family members were away. Assuming he might be in the bathroom or taking a quick nap, I patiently waited for a few minutes before giving the horn again. Surprisingly, there was still no answer. Puzzled about his whereabouts, I decided to call him and ask where he was. However, when he did not pick up the phone, I called my father, who revealed that the gatekeeper had to leave early due to a family emergency. He said that he had already informed them about it and told me to use the spare keys to enter the house, leaving the car on the street until they returned. Following his instructions, I stepped out of my car, double-checked that it was securely locked, used the spare keys to open the gate, and made my way into the house. However, just as I stepped onto the porch, shock hit me like a sudden gust of wind. The front door, which I distinctly remembered locking before leaving, stood wide open. Puzzled by this sight, my thoughts raced when I started hearing faint noises from upstairs. It was as if someone was tiptoeing through rooms, creating an eerie atmosphere. Caught off guard by this unexpected turn of events, I stood frozen for a moment. Swiftly recovering, I pulled out my phone and texted my father, sharing the bizarre situation unfolding in our own home. Comforting me and urging me not to panic, my father assured me that they were on their way back. He also mentioned that he was calling the police for help. While waiting for them, he advised me to go back outside and sit in the car for safety. Following his advice, I turned to head back to my car. However, just as I was about to do so, a chilling whisper shattered the eerie quiet from behind, warning me not to move. The realization that I had unknowingly let the criminal get so close sent a shiver down my spine. Feeling a sharp pressure against my back, as though a knife were pressed into my spine, the person who was standing right behind me told me to avoid making a sound and get inside. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, I chose not to make any sudden moves and simply followed what they said, moving inside the house. At that moment, my house, which was usually a place of comfort, seemed like the most dangerous and haunting place to me. As I reached the living room of the house, I found it to be in a mess, proving that it had been ransacked. While I tried to make sense of the chaos, the person behind me instructed their accomplices to blindfold and restrain me, a command swiftly executed by the others. Seating me forcefully on the sofa and pressing a knife against my neck, the person then demanded the code to the vault kept in my father's room while threatening to take my life if I tried to be smart. Thinking that the most important thing at the moment was my safety, I shared the code, which they tried and successfully opened the vault. After that, they told me to get up, took me to a room, and locked me inside while snatching away my phone from me. Blindfolded and with my hands tied, I sat in the room, fervently praying for the swift arrival of my family and the police. Thankfully, a few moments later, the piercing wail of sirens shattered the air, sending the robbers into a frenzy. Desperate to escape, they scattered, leaping out of windows and fleeing through the back door. Amid their chaos, the house doors burst open, filled with the voices of my family and the hustle of people moving all around. Believing that the police had arrived to thwart the robbery, I stayed in the locked room, relieved that things had turned out better than I had anticipated. Just then, the door of the room clicked open, followed by the voice of my father, who rescued me from my confinement while expressing his relief at my well-being. It was a relief to discover that the majority of the robbers had been caught, leaving only 2 who managed to escape. Thankfully, they did not manage to take anything valuable with them. The whole ordeal was incredibly frightening for me. Witnessing a robbery and feeling such a grave threat to my life shook me to the core. After that incident, I had to take a few days off to renovate our destroyed house and come out of the psychological impact of the dangerous event that had put my life at risk. A dinner had been arranged in honor of our senior colleague, a stalwart who had taken retirement and was bidding farewell to a long career. The evening was filled with heartfelt speeches, tributes, and nostalgic anecdotes, prolonging the festivities well into the late hours. After it finally concluded, we left the venue, wishing the best of luck to him for the future, and prepared to leave. Being the one who had brought his own car, I took on the responsibility of dropping off my friends on my way home. After bidding farewell to each of them one by one, I finally set off for my own house. It was about 1 a.m., and the roads were almost empty, except for the occasionally passing vehicles. Every now and then, a passing car would light up the road with its headlights. Suddenly, this monotony of night was broken by the sight of a distressed couple that stood in the middle of the road. Waving his hand, the man was requesting that I stop the car while the woman who stood by his slide looked frail and sick. It seemed as if they were in trouble and needed my help. Out of empathy and compassion, I stopped the car and lowered the window of the front passenger seat, asking if they needed any help. Leaning closer to the window, the man who was covering his face with a mask began to explain the situation. "My wife is gravely ill and needs to be shifted to the hospital immediately. We would be very grateful if you could please give us a lift," the man pleaded, looking at the woman who seemed ill and in need of medication. Expressing their gratitude, the man opened the back door of the car and told the woman to sit inside while he sat in the front seat himself. With a heavy foot on the gas pedal, I then took a U-turn and sped towards the hospital to drop them off and reach home before it got late. I talked to the distressed man, inquiring about the sudden urgency that had propelled them to the hospital in such haste. The question seemed to catch the person off guard. He hesitated for a moment before finally breaking the silence. "She suffers from asthma," came the response, and she had a sudden, severe attack. This reply seemed a little strange to me. A person fully aware of the symptoms of an asthma attack because of having an asthma patient in my family. In contrast to the symptoms like dizziness, wheezing, coughing, and appearing breathless, the woman seemed perfectly well and too good for an asthma patient, something that bothered me. However, considering it inappropriate to ask such things, I decided to reach the hospital as soon as I could. I suddenly caught the reflection of the woman in the rearview mirror, finding her exchanging a malevolent gaze. Realizing that their intentions were not good, I began to feel uneasy, wondering what to do. Nevertheless, before I could do anything, the man took out a gun from his pocket and pressed it against my forehead, telling me to stop the car. I fumbled with the controls, bringing the vehicle to an uneasy halt by the side of the road. Shocked at why they would treat a person who tried to help them like that, I asked for an explanation of their actions. However, what I heard in response was not words but a cruel laughter. "Empathy and compassion are weaknesses that we target," said the woman while putting a knife on my neck. Telling me to do as they said if I wanted to live, the man then told me to hand over everything I had. Prioritizing my safety over material possessions, I handed over everything I had, including the platinum ring on my finger. As I surrendered my belongings, the woman, under the ominous presence of the knife at my neck, took them from me and stashed them in the back seat. The man, cold and indifferent, swung the car door open and made his exit, leaving me stranded and vulnerable in the wake of the unsettling encounter. Coming towards the driver's side, he opened the door, telling me to come out while pointing his gun at me. Having no choice but to comply, I came out of the car and moved aside while trying to see his face, which was covered with a mask. However, before I could get a glimpse of that, the person struck my head with his gun, causing me to feel an intense surge of pain and dizziness and crashed to the ground. Meanwhile, the person returned to the car, started the engine, and went away, leaving me alone on the desolate road. Luckily, there was a telephone booth a little distance away from me that I managed to reach. This experience caused me to learn the lesson of not trusting anyone no matter what. I became overly cautious and never gave a lift to anyone, especially when I was alone in the car or driving at night.